What is the creepiest, this can't be real moment you've ever experienced? Story 1. When I was delivering pizzas in my 20s, I knocked on a door and realized right after that I was at the wrong address. It was on 9th Street Southwest instead of 9th Street Northwest, meaning I was on the complete opposite side of town. As the guy opened the door, I was about to do my usual, "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you. Have a nice day," routine for wrong addresses. But the man didn't look confused and was holding money, ready to go. It turns out he had ordered pizza, but accidentally put his address in wrong, which meant I was accidentally at the right place. Our two mistakes perfectly canceled each other out. To this day, I wonder about the actual odds of that happening. It feels like it has to be way more than 1 in a million. Story 2, I wasn't even looking up when I was in the passenger seat during a head-on collision. All I know is there was a huge bang, and when I looked up, it was just a red metal wall on fire. I looked to my right, and there was open street with debris scattered all over the road. None of it made sense. I had no idea where I was or why blood was pouring out of my face and into my hands. I kept staring, trying to figure out what that burning red wall was. Then I turned to my right again and saw a young blonde woman screaming into her phone. I was still trying to understand what the red wall was until I saw a firefighter grab me roughly, asking questions, something about my age. They loaded me onto a gurney, and as I was being wheeled away, I finally saw the entire smashed car. That's when I realized I had been in an accident. The red wall was the hood of the car folded up vertically, and the battery was on fire. None of it made any sense until I saw the whole wreck. Story 3, the hotel cleaning staff came back to the front desk, complaining that they couldn't clean a room because there was an alligator in the bathtub. I thought I had misunderstood something at first. I hadn't. There was literally a decent-sized alligator in the bathtub, about 3 feet long. Not big enough to kill anyone, but definitely big enough that no one wanted to go back in there. It turned out the guest was the animal guy for a magic show. The real shock was when he came back from the set that day, and after asking why his room hadn't been cleaned, told us to our faces that there were no animals in his room, now or ever. He stuck to that story through an increasingly baffling and angry conversation, so confidently that even I started to doubt reality itself. This continued throughout his weeks-long stay. Housekeeping resorted to taking pictures of whatever weird exotic animal he had in there, but he still denied it. At one point, he claimed his assistant had been in the room all day, so it was perfectly safe, even though no one was there. He'd be practically foaming at the mouth with anger, insisting there were no animals. And then we'd find a capuchin monkey loose in the room. Story 4. I was texting my mom asking if she wanted me to pick up food for us on my way home from work. I had been a huge jerk to her that morning before I left and felt bad about it. About 30 minutes later, my dad replied, "Mom's gone. She passed. The ambulance is here." She had died unexpectedly. That morning at 9 o'clock, I was huffing at her to get out of the bathroom so I could shower and go to work. By the time my shift was almost over, she was gone. I remember walking in a daze, running straight into my boss and choking on my words. I don't remember driving home or what anyone said when I got there. She was inside covered with a cloth, and all I could see were her feet sticking out. I kept thinking this was some kind of sick joke or a bad dream. She was only 54, and I was 23. I hadn't expected to lose a parent at all, much less on a random Tuesday in October. It still feels surreal, her death, planning her funeral, driving up to Toronto to pick out a casket, the entire year that followed. But the scariest part is that I don't remember what she sounded like or what she looked like anymore. She hated having her picture taken, and I think my way of coping with the sudden trauma was to forget what it was like living with her. My entire childhood, teen years, and early adulthood now feel like I'm watching a movie about someone else's life when she was alive. Grief is strange, and that feeling of, my world has ended, but everyone else is still going to work and paying bills, is impossible to explain. Story 5. Years ago, I used to take side jobs for extra money. Painting, handyman work, building decks, things like that. One time I had a side job painting a water tower about 30 feet tall and 10 feet in diameter. I had a buddy and his son helping me so they could earn some extra cash too. It was a Sunday morning in spring, and the weather in North Texas can be insane. You can literally get all 4 seasons in a single day. It started off warm and sunny, but I noticed a dark cloud in the distance. The wind picked up, the temperature dropped, and soon a few raindrops started falling. Then came the gusts. I tried to finish a small section, hoping the rain wouldn't ruin it. By that time it was really windy, and I was about 15 feet up on a ladder. I decided to climb down, but a huge gust hit me out of nowhere. The ladder lifted off the ground for a moment. It was an extra-wide extension ladder, so I managed to turn around on it, thinking I might have to jump off. As it started to tip over, I basically ran down it. My weight, the angle, and the speed of the fall all lined up perfectly. I literally ran down a falling ladder and hit the ground just as it did. My buddy's son yelled, "Holy crap, that was some Jackie Chan stuff." I'm just an average guy, marginally athletic, early 30s, nothing special, and it was pure luck. In another universe, I fell off and broke my neck, but that day science and physics were definitely on my side. Story 6, I'm a defense attorney. Last year, I second-chaired a week-long murder trial. I handled the expert witnesses, directing our own expert and cross-examining the prosecutions. My co-worker took the lead on the opening and closing arguments and handled the lay witnesses. We thought we had a strong case, and my coworker did an incredible job, especially during closing. Without getting too deep into the details, it was a bar fight gone wrong. A man stumbled into a crowd, completely wasted, shoving people and yelling racial slurs. One thing led to another, and he got into a fight with a large group outside the bar. Maybe 10 to 30 people involved. My client, a tall, heavy-set black woman, was accused of kicking the victim in the head while he was down, which they claimed caused his death. Only 2 people said they saw her do it, sisters from a notorious local family with a rap sheet longer than your arm. One of them, a small blonde woman, was caught on video bragging that she had kicked the guy 3 times in the head and even acted it out. On the stand, she admitted that she lied and she lied and she lied to the police. We also had a witness in an apartment above the scene who said she saw what looked like a short white man kicking the victim after the fight was over. She even said she assumed it had to be a man because no woman could be that vicious. The jury deliberated for hours. Finally, around 9 o'clock that night, the verdict came back, guilty on all counts. My client just kept saying, "No, no, 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 no." Her mom was sobbing behind me in the gallery. My co-counsel looked shattered. I'd never seen him that way before or since. He was completely spent, but we still had to go through the sentencing phase, which the jury would also decide. I had never done that before. I'd never even seen it done. He asked me to take over, and I could tell that even though I had no idea what I was doing, I was still in better shape than he was. Then the clerk and judge found an error in the verdict form, so the jury had to go back and deliberate again. For 30 or 40 minutes, we waited, hoping maybe they had made a mistake. When they returned, they confirmed it again. Guilty on all counts. My client and her family had to hear that twice in less than an hour. Somehow, even though every instinct told me it was a nightmare I needed to wake up from, my head spinning, the room sweltering, my tie choking me, and every nerve screaming to just walk out, I pulled myself together for sentencing. I gave a closing argument completely off the top of my head, with no preparation, just speaking from the heart and drawing from the emotional testimony her family had given. It was after 10:30 at night. We were all drained, but when the jury returned, they gave the minimum sentence possible for the murder charge. It was the only victory we had, but it's something I'll never forget. That night felt like one long panic dream where I was waiting to wake up. Only this time, I didn't. It just kept going, and it kept getting worse. I'll go to my grave knowing that woman was wronged. Story 7, I was assisting in an organ donation when I witnessed the moment a young woman's heart was lifted out of her chest, carried across the operating room, carefully packed into a transport chamber, and then sprinted out of the room by the courier. Until that point in the procedure, it hadn't truly sunk in that the patient was deceased because she was a donation after brain death case. She was still warm to the touch and under anesthesia monitoring. Once the heart was removed, we packed her chest cavity with ice and continued harvesting her kidneys, spleen, and vessels. The anesthesia provider then removed her breathing tube and quietly left the room. I remember feeling an intense chill and a slow-motion awareness as her heart was lifted, like I was witnessing something sacred. Later that week, the operating room team was informed that her organs had saved 6 lives. I don't know how those patients are doing now, but I hope that heart is still beating somewhere. Story 8. One night, my elderly neighbor came over and asked, "Want to see something?" I said sure, and she told me to grab my keys. It was already late, but I went along anyway, and she met me by my car. She gave me directions to a farm with a fenced area that held around 80 to 100 cows. We stood outside the fence, and she kept glancing at her watch. At that point, I honestly thought I was about to be murdered. But what happened next, I still can't explain. One by one, all the cows knelt down, every single one. They stayed that way for about a minute or two, then stood up and wandered around like nothing had happened. My neighbor silently got back into the car, and after I finally picked my jaw up, I followed. We drove home in complete silence. When we pulled into the driveway, I asked her what the hell I had just seen. She made a motion like zipping her lips and tossing away the key. I went back to that farm several times afterward, but I never saw anything unusual again. I even talked to one of the farm employees, probably sounding like a complete lunatic asking about kneeling cows, but she refused to acknowledge anything. This was over 25 years ago, and I still think about it. Story 9. In the year 2010 or 2011, my wife and I were driving back home from a professional tennis tournament in Miami to Lakeland, which is between Tampa and Orlando. The tournament ended late, so we started the 4-hour drive around midnight. We took rural Route 27, which passes through several small towns known for their speed traps. Back then, the speed limit dropped from 55 to 35 miles per hour as you entered each town. My radar detector would go off right at the speed limit sign in nearly 75% of those towns. At one town, I can't remember which, there was only one traffic light. It turned yellow as I approached, and I would have had to speed up to beat it, but I got suspicious and slowed down. Sure enough, I was hit with radar. It was strange because there was no other traffic to trigger the light. I looked around and spotted a police car parked near one of the buildings. I sat at the red light, waiting for it to turn yellow the other way, but it never did. It went from green to red, then straight back to green for me. The officer was controlling the light manually. I had thought the timing was a little too perfect at first, but when it skipped the yellow light entirely on the other side, that confirmed it. The cop was literally operating the light to catch people. Story 10. When my country experienced a massive earthquake that took many lives, I had a newborn baby and a 3-year-old child. I was at my parents' house alone when the quake hit. My dad had old carpentry tools, bricks, and other heavy items on shelves in the lounge above me. They all came crashing down during the violent shaking. I was thrown off my chair onto the floor. My daughter was in her bouncer beneath me, and I crawled over to pull my son from the other side of the room where he had been playing with his toy cars until the shaking finally stopped. As soon as the ground settled, I picked up my son, carried the bouncer, and ran outside into the street. Alarms were blaring. People were screaming and running. Cars were speeding past. Total chaos. Oddly enough, a man walked calmly by, reading a book as if nothing had happened. My neighbor took me into her undamaged home until my mom arrived, and we waited there for several hours until my dad got back from work. Traffic had been terrible for obvious reasons, and he came home to assess the structural damage since he was a builder. The house was still standing, but declared a total loss by insurance. The most surreal part was that my dad had taken a photo of the lounge later that day. In the picture, the spot where I had been sitting was covered in fallen tools. If the force of the quake hadn't thrown me off that chair, I would have been killed. My daughter's bouncer was sitting in a clear circle where nothing had fallen, and my son had also been in a small, untouched area. Every other part of the floor was covered with debris. We were unbelievably lucky. After that, my dad never put anything dangerous on those shelves again. Story 11. I was with my then fiancée, now wife, Christmas shopping on November 20th, 2005. We went to Suncoast trying to think of gift ideas left, And as we were about to round the corner, my wife suddenly stopped us and said she just thought of getting Friends season DVDs for a friend. So we turned around and walked back into Suncoast. Seconds later, a mass shooter opened fire. We had been walking directly toward where the shooter started firing, so if we hadn't turned back, we would have been right in front of him when he began shooting. I'll never forget the echoes of the gunshots or the screams that followed. I remember running back out to help older people who were frozen in place, trying to herd them into the store, and I'm pretty sure I saw some people get shot. I had run into a co-worker just minutes before the attack, a big tough trucker type, and he saw much more than I did. When he returned to work later, he broke down crying when I asked if he was okay. We got locked inside Suncoast for a while, listening to the gunfire and screams outside, while a store promo film and Christmas music played in the background. It was surreal and terrifying. At first, we thought maybe it was a gang thing since mass shootings weren't so common back then. But as the shots kept coming and people screamed, we realized we were trapped and helpless. We yelled at the employees to let us out through the back. I think we left just as hostages were being taken at the nearby Sam Goody store. As we filed out the back, there were police cars surrounding the area, sirens blaring, and more arriving. Outside, people were crying, screaming, and running. It was total chaos, and we had missed being caught in it by mere seconds, all thanks to some Friends DVDs. Story 12. Where I live, there's a castle just down the road, and the lord of the area still lives there. He's a bit younger than me, and our sons went to the same primary school and became friends. Over time, I became friends with his father, a normal guy, just very aware of his 800-year family lineage. He gets invited to all sorts of events and was once asked to take part in a local regatta, a rowing race. He needed 2 more rowers for a paired relay and invited me to join. I told him I was more of a sailor than a rower, but he said it was just for fun. Another rower was found, and we were assigned the first leg together. I met him the evening of the race, and it wasn't until we were on the water that I realized how seriously he was taking it. He had to lower his expectations quickly after seeing how bad I was. To his credit, he didn't complain and even coached me through it, but we still came in last for the handover. It turned out that this man was a gold medalist in the British Rowing Championships. The second leg didn't go much better. Our other pair were also complete amateurs, competing against seasoned rowers. We finished dead last by quite a distance. We stayed for the presentation of the cups afterward, which were being handed out by the Lord Mayor of the town. By chance, his wife had once been my teaching assistant. There was a special cup for the first boat entered from a local town, not the host town, and since we were the only boat from there, we won it. So there I was, standing beside a lord of the realm, a British gold medalist, and a local historian, being presented a trophy for rowing, my first time doing it in about 20 years, by the Lord Mayor's wife, who used to be my teaching assistant. Definitely not my usual kind of day. Story 13. One night around 2 a.m, I dropped about 150 micrograms of acid on the beach. I was sitting on a sand dune, feeling the warm ocean breeze and completely at peace with the universe, when suddenly about 30 people came onto the beach, no more than 100 feet away from me. Each of them had one of those $200 lightsabers, the high-quality ones that leave glowing color trails in the air. And they started a full-on lightsaber battle right there. They were running around, shouting catchphrases, laughing, and hitting each other with absolute joy. The whole thing went on for over an hour of light, color, and energy. I sat there in awe. There was no way they could see me. It was dark, and I was tucked into the reeds on my dune, so it felt like a private show made just for me. They must have been part of a Star Wars club from the local university, and they'll never know there was a hidden witness to their incredible performance. But I'll always be grateful for that magical night. Story 14. My mom left my dad shortly after I was born, for very legitimate reasons. She knew he had a son from a previous relationship, and she knew both the son's and his mother's names. She was always open about it, and when I turned 27, I finally decided I wanted to talk about it. She was thrilled and pulled out a picture she had kept all these years, a photo of the son, my half-brother, around 2 or 3 years old. Excited that I was finally ready to know more, she tried to find him online by searching his first name and his mother's first name, which almost never works. But this time it did. The result that came up was for a world-famous artist who had been raised by his single mother with that exact name. At 5 in the morning, my mom called me, her voice shaking as she told me she'd found him and who he was. It felt completely surreal. We double-checked everything, the photos, the interviews, the background, and it all matched. He refused to contact us, which honestly hurt, but I managed to find another sibling. Not famous this time, with whom I now share a very warm relationship. I still can't help but wonder how many undiscovered siblings I might have out there. Story 15. I was part of a small online gaming clan centered around a specific political ideology. It was a very niche group with maybe 20 to 30 active members at most. One of my closest friends in the clan was from Finland, and they often joked that no other Finn would ever join since most gamers from their country didn't share that political stance. So when another Finnish player finally joined, everyone was thrilled. A few days later, the three of us went on a boss-killing run together while talking in a voice chat. Everything was normal until suddenly both of them made startled noises at the same time. When I asked what happened, they said it was lightning. I thought that was strange since I hadn't heard any thunder or static through my headset, which made me think they must have been very close to each other. Then they started asking questions to figure out where each of them lived. "What city are you in?" "Oh, really? Me too. What district?" They kept narrowing it down, laughing with disbelief each time they found another similarity. Eventually, it got to the point where they realized they weren't just in the same city, not just the same building, and not even just the same floor. They were next-door neighbors. They had been living right beside each other for who knows how long without ever realizing it. It was only through this small, extremely specific online space and a random lightning strike during a gaming session that they discovered they had been neighbors all along. Story 16. When I canceled my wedding, the whole day felt like something out of a movie. The night before, I was consumed with anger, and that same anger carried me into the morning when I made the decision. But it didn't feel like normal anger. It felt like being wrapped in a thick cocoon that separated me from the rest of the world. I started making calls one after another. I called the vendors, canceling everything we had booked. I called family members on my side, breaking the news. I even posted the neutral social media announcement saying the wedding wasn't happening. I did all those things, but it didn't feel like I was doing them. It was like I was floating just behind my own body, watching someone else handle the situation. My ex begged me not to go through with it. I remember the look on her face, pleading, crying, but I stayed perfectly calm inside that bubble of anger. It was like nothing could touch me. I gave her nothing but silence and finality. That entire day was surreal. Every action, every word felt detached, as if it was scripted for a movie I didn't remember agreeing to star in. Even now, almost 10 years later, I remember the feeling more than the details. I remember the stillness, the cold clarity, and the overwhelming sense that I wasn't truly there. Like it wasn't real, like someone else had stepped into my life for a few hours to make those impossible decisions for me, and then handed it back when it was too late to undo anything. Story 17. This didn't happen to me personally, but to an old school friend from Wigan who I've known my whole life. She's one of those straightforward, no-nonsense people who would never make something like this up, which makes it all the more unbelievable. Back in the late 1980s, her school organized a big class trip. For expensive trips like that, students had to use a paying-in book where they'd record their installment payments. You'd bring your money to the teacher, who'd sign and date the book each time. My friend's surname is fairly unusual, so her name was clearly written across the front of the little banner brand notebook, the kind issued by the government stationery supplier back then. After the trip, she tossed the book in the rubbish and never thought about it again. Fast forward a few decades. Her mother, who had become a teacher in Liverpool, was handed a small notebook by one of her students. The student explained that while their family was renovating their old house and taking out a chimney, they found the notebook wedged behind the bricks of the fireplace. The reason they brought it to her? The name on the front matched her surname exactly. When she examined it more closely, she realized it was the exact same paying-in book her daughter had used for that school trip in the 1980s. Somehow it had traveled from Wigan to Liverpool and ended up sealed behind a fireplace wall, untouched for over 30 years. No one has ever figured out how it got there. Story 18. I once had a bizarre encounter with what I can only describe as a drunk, or maybe poisoned, hawk. I was camping alone in a small patch of trees between farms in rural Nebraska. It was late at night, and I decided to go exploring and check out the small stream running nearby. As I made my way through the trees, my flashlight caught something strange, a large hawk hanging upside down by its talons from a branch. It was alive, completely conscious, and staring right at me. I froze, unsure of what to do, before running back to my campsite to grab my camera. When I came back, it was still there, blinking slowly, wings slightly spread. I snapped a few photos and then it suddenly dropped, flapped awkwardly, and landed on another branch, this time upright. It kept doing this over and over again, shifting branches like it was struggling to stay balanced. Its movements were jerky and uncoordinated, almost like it was dizzy or heavily intoxicated. My best guess is that it had eaten a poisoned rat or some kind of contaminated prey from one of the nearby farms. Not enough to kill it, but enough to leave it completely disoriented. Watching it stumble from branch to branch was both fascinating and heartbreaking. It was the kind of strange, haunting sight you can't look away from. I stayed there for nearly an hour, watching the poor thing until it finally managed to steady itself and fly off into the darkness, disappearing into the night. Story 19. My poor mom had never once had a birthday party for herself, so for her 50th birthday, we decided to throw her a huge surprise celebration. Friends were coming from all over the country, some even from abroad. Everything was set up perfectly, and she had no idea that anything was happening. While I was getting ready, my brother called me, which was odd because he never called. He was crying uncontrollably, and I instantly knew something was wrong. Through sobs, he told me that our grandfather, my dad's father, had died, and the police were trying to get access to his house. It turned out he had choked on a ham sandwich the night before. The man had beaten cancer multiple times only to die choking on a sandwich. They found him barely an hour before the party was supposed to start. We had to cancel everything, and my mom's long-awaited birthday celebration never happened. My dad had to bury his own father instead. The whole day was so bizarre and surreal, like a movie that shifts from joy to tragedy in an instant. Later, once the coroner's report was released, the story made it into the national newspaper. My grandfather, who always had a dark sense of humor, would have gotten such a kick out of his death by ham sandwich being announced to the entire country. Story 20. I have a few stories, and though I'm not a great writer, these are the ones that stayed with me the most. I was 16 years old, living in a small Kansas town. My parents had gone out for the night, and I'd gone to the county fair and out to eat with friends before coming home to an empty house. That wasn't unusual. My parents were big partiers. But it felt off because they were supposed to be home, and every single light in the house was on. I felt uneasy, but decided to go to bed. Later that night, I woke up to see my grandmother standing over me, telling me to get dressed and come downstairs. She had never been in my room before, and I was groggy and confused. She repeated, "You need to hurry, get dressed and come downstairs." Still half asleep, I grabbed my shoes and went down the stairs. On the way down, I caught the reflection of a police officer standing at the bottom. I sat on the step to put on my shoes, and my grandmother stepped out of the kitchen with the cop beside her. "Your mom and Jim were in a wreck, and Jim died," she said. She reached out like she wanted to hug me, but I just kept tying my shoes. My mind couldn't process what I just heard. It turned out my parents had gone off the road into a field, and no one noticed for about 5 hours. Both had been alive at first, but my dad died as they arrived at the nearest hospital. My mom was airlifted to a trauma center with severe injuries, a broken back in 6 places, a broken neck, shattered ribs, a collapsed lung, and internal damage that required removing her spleen. That night marked the beginning of a completely different life for me. The second story happened when I was a junior at an English boarding school in Texas, of all places. Before class one morning, my legs started burning and itching. I looked down and realized fire ants were crawling up through cracks in the brick floor of my dorm room. I had an allergic reaction and passed out just outside the nurse's housing unit. They rushed me to the hospital and gave me shots to stabilize me. For the next few nights, I stayed with another girl who was a light sleeper, just in case anything else happened. After a few days, they fixed the floor and let me move back in. My house parents, the husband also being my dean of students, were nervous and checked on me a few times at night. During one of those checks, the dean noticed I was breathing strangely. He yelled for his wife, and I remember hearing a faint voice, like in a dream. Apparently, when they pulled the blankets off me, I was covered in fire ants again, like something out of a horror movie. Right then, I stopped breathing. They called an ambulance, and I was rushed to the emergency room, where my heart started acting erratically. They had to defibrillate me. I woke up in the hospital sore, with wires and tubes everywhere, completely disoriented. I had literally died because of fire ants. The third story happened years later when my daughter woke me up, screaming that my boyfriend had fallen down the stairs and wasn't moving. I ran downstairs and it was obvious he wasn't breathing. No pulse, no heartbeat. I froze for a second before instinct kicked in. I called 911, put the phone on speaker, positioned his head, and started CPR. What made it more surreal was that when the first officer arrived, he just stood there watching me do CPR. He didn't help at all, just talked on his radio. Dispatch told him to use Narcan since they didn't know the cause, and instead of helping, he handed it to me and told me to do it myself, while I was still performing CPR, wearing nothing but a short nightgown. I kept going for about 25 minutes until the ambulance arrived. When they finally took over, they didn't even bother doing CPR at first. They assumed he was gone. I went upstairs to put on pants, completely numb. Then they did another round of Narcan, because that's the standard procedure, and suddenly he took a deep breath, scaring the hell out of everyone. He was alive. The whole thing felt unreal, like a nightmare you don't wake up from until someone starts breathing again. Story 21. For me, the most surreal moment of my life was the day we found out my mom had cancer. I was at work when the hospital called and left a voicemail saying my mom had passed out at her job. She worked at that same hospital, and they asked if I could come down. I left work immediately, thinking she had probably skipped a meal or that the humid weather had gotten to her. When I arrived, they didn't waste a second before breaking the news. They had found a tumor on one of her lung scans, and the fainting spell had actually been a seizure caused by cancer that had likely already spread to her brain. My mom, my brother, and I just sat there in silence. None of us even knew how to react. When I finally got home, I cried harder and longer than I ever had in my life. The kind of crying that makes you feel like you'll never stop. The moment they told us didn't even feel real. Time seemed to slow down, like I had misunderstood what was happening. For days afterward, I'd get hit with waves of shock just replaying that moment in my mind. She passed away 10 months later. Even now, the thought that my mom is gone, that she no longer exists in this world, still feels as impossible and surreal as the day they told me she was sick. Story 22. I was walking down a dirt road in Iraq, talking to an Iraqi police officer I was escorting to the bunker, struggling to understand his broken English. Suddenly, the air was just gone. It exploded past him, tearing his clothes and blowing his hair back. For a moment, I couldn't comprehend what had happened. Then I realized we were both moving. The silence wasn't silence, and all the sounds in the world seemed to crash together at once. Everything after that came in fragments. Drowning, blinding light, searing pain. We had been hit by a controlled detonation, a condiet, that the EOD unit hadn't given a 2-minute warning for. My body armor, the IOTV, saved my life. Shrapnel tore straight through the officer's chest and we both fell into a fish pond. He drowned almost instantly. 2 more Iraqi police officers behind us died as well. The last thing I clearly saw with my left eye was the shock wiping the smile off that man's face. Sometimes it still feels like it didn't happen to me. Like it's something I watched on a screen. But being nearly blind and deaf on one side is a constant reminder that it was all real. Story 23. I went to my local Chinese takeaway to grab some dinner one night, only to walk straight into what looked like a bizarre standoff. A wild-eyed Scottish man was yelling at the tiny, terrified old man who ran the shop. Apparently, the Scotsman had bullied him into calling a taxi, but was now accusing him of lying and calling the police instead. The shop owner was insisting he had called a taxi, clearly just trying to get the man to leave, but the guy wasn't buying it. I stepped in to try to calm things down, and the man immediately turned his attention to me. He threw a leather pouch of tobacco at me and told me to make him a cigarette. While I was rolling it, he started rambling about being paranoid because he had just escaped from a nearby notorious prison. He then asked if I knew how to deal with police dogs. I said no, and he said, "You wait for them to nearly get you, then grab their back legs and tear the bastards in half." He lit the cigarette I just rolled him, smoked it right there in the takeaway, and kept talking casually about his violent crimes. Finally, a taxi pulled up outside, and without another word, he bolted out the door and jumped in. I had just spent half an hour babysitting a literal escaped convict, and I hadn't even ordered my food yet. When it was over, the old man behind the counter just looked at me, took my order, and acted like nothing had happened, not even a thank you, or a free bag of prawn crackers, after all that chaos. Story 24. We had a suicidal patient who needed to be transferred to the secure ward as a precaution after we discovered a suicide note. The plan was for him to come back later that same day to collect his belongings. Since he had distanced himself from suicidal thoughts after speaking with us, we didn't think there would be any problem. My colleagues and I went out for a smoke while waiting for him. Because all the terraces were full, we walked into the garden instead. I thought I saw a hedgehog in the bushes and wandered a bit farther, when suddenly in the distance, maybe 200 meters away, I saw the patient walking down a secluded path. A strange feeling hit me hard, and I asked my colleague to come with me to check on him. We both felt uneasy as we made our way through the bushes, and at the very last moment, we found him, about to take his own life in the most remote part of the compound. We stopped him, walked him back to the secure ward, sat with him, and spoke again until he was calm. Then we just stood there afterward, completely stunned, both thinking the same thing. What are the odds? There were so many tiny coincidences. Choosing that path, going for a smoke, me thinking I saw a hedgehog, all of it aligning in exactly the right way to make sure we found him in time. Story 25. It was around 2001, and I had just finished a long, frustrating shift waiting tables at TGI Fridays. All I wanted to do was get home, relax, and eat dinner in front of the TV. When I walked into the apartment, my roommate was already 6 beers deep into a pack of Bud Light. He cracked open his 7th as I dropped onto the couch. He was in a loud, drunk, teasing mood, while I was in no mood at all. He started poking at me and joking around, and I finally snapped. I grabbed the plastic ring from the 6-pack and slammed it down on the floor in anger. But as I swung it, one of the cans flew backward, straight into the front doorway, hitting the wall with a loud thud. My rage instantly faded, replaced by shock at the sound. My roommate and I both froze, then laughed it off and made peace. Later, he told me to look at what I'd done to the wall. When I went over, the beer can was crumpled on the floor but hadn't exploded, even though there were chunks of drywall everywhere. We laughed at how weird it looked, a crushed can that somehow stayed sealed. I went to patch the hole and started pulling away pieces of broken plaster. That's when I saw something metallic inside the wall. Curious, I kept digging and finally pulled it out with a pair of pliers. It was another can, an old 1980s Shasta soda can, perfectly wedged inside the wall. Someone decades earlier had apparently repaired that exact same spot by using the Shasta can as a filler behind the plaster. I couldn't believe it. I had thrown a beer can into the exact same section of wall that someone had already patched up years ago using another can. The odds of that happening must be astronomically low. Story 26. I work at a clinic and always kept a bright orange water bottle there. Hard to miss, with a rounded, tapered end always sitting in the exact same spot. One morning I came in and it was gone. That immediately threw me off because no one ever moved it, not even the cleaners who had been there the night before. I figured maybe they shifted it to clean, but it had never happened before, so it didn't make sense. I asked everyone in the clinic if they had seen it. No one had. Around lunchtime, I was going crazy trying to figure out what happened. We called the cleaner, and he swore he hadn't touched it or even seen it. Then around 1 or 2 in the afternoon, my coworker Kay said she had found it, hidden with a bunch of loose tools and medical instruments. It was completely slick on the outside, covered in some kind of greasy residue. That's when we noticed that one of the tubs of Vaseline we keep in the clinic had been scooped out, like 3 thick fingerfuls missing, messy and obvious. When we wiped down the bottle, we realized it was speckled with little brown stains. My coworker Jay called the cleaner again, asking if he was absolutely sure he hadn't touched it. He doubled down, swearing he hadn't. Jay then said calmly, "Okay, I just wanted to check before we look at the camera footage." There aren't actually any cameras in the back. The cleaner suddenly panicked and asked, "You have cameras back there?" He started stumbling over his words, apologizing, saying he'd compensate us. About 45 minutes later, he showed up at the clinic with $50 in cash, insisting it was to make up for the confusion. After that, I stopped keeping a water bottle at the clinic, because you never know when someone might decide to do something disturbing with it. Story 27. It was September 27th, 2024. I was home when I heard an enormous rumble outside. I looked through the window just in time to see my neighbor's tree crash to the ground under hurricane-force winds. I rushed to the basement and was shocked to see daylight and rain pouring through where a wall had been. The entire supporting wall of our house had collapsed. My wife grabbed our corgi and we ran for the car, hoping to reach the town's designated shelter. The nearest one was just a mile away, across the river, but as we got closer, we saw the water had risen by dozens of feet. The entire bridge was completely underwater. We turned east, hoping to reach another shelter, but we weren't the only ones trying. Every road was jammed or blocked by fallen trees. Before long, we lost cell service completely. With no options left, we made the difficult decision to return home. After hours of detours and blocked roads, we finally reached what was left of our house. We climbed inside through the damaged entryway into the half of the structure that was still standing. There was no power, only darkness, wind, and rain hammering the walls. We huddled together, the two of us and the dog, in that one intact corner, holding each other and praying that the rest of the house wouldn't come down on us. Story 28. In the early 2000s, I was chatting online through AOL Instant Messenger with my friend Mike, who had a very unusual last name. My name is also uncommon, so it was always easy for us to find each other. We had been messaging casually for about a year. Things like, "See you at Pete's this weekend," or "Are you going to Sarah's thing next week?" or "Can't wait for the barbecue." We talk about weekend plans all the time. One day while chatting, I mentioned his best friend Croffy, and suddenly he had no idea what I was talking about. I thought he was joking, but he seemed genuinely confused. I started asking him other questions, and his frustration grew while mine did too, until after about 30 minutes of back and forth, we both realized we didn't actually know each other at all. We'd never met. We'd been talking to complete strangers for a year, somehow never realizing it. It turned out that when I first added his email address, I had mistyped one letter. Just one. And that mistake led me to another guy named Mike who lived 1,000 miles away in North Dakota. His best friend happened to be close to someone who shared my rare last name. That coincidence alone was weird enough. But what's even stranger is that my last name is so rare that everyone in the U.S. with it descends from the same 4 people who immigrated in the early 1900s. Which means I was, at least distantly, related to this random stranger's friend. Our lives were oddly parallel, so much so that our weekend plans always seemed to make sense in both of our worlds. It wasn't until that one slip about Croffy that the illusion broke. We never spoke again after that. Years later, after I moved to Australia, I got emails from another one of his friends saying, "Dude, when did you move to Australia? I just saw you last week." He had Googled my name and found me, the wrong Mike's friend, all over again. Story 29. My wife and I went on a safari in Uganda for our honeymoon. As we were driving toward our lodge in Kabale, where we'd be doing chimp trekking and a primate walk, our guide started talking with us about forest elephants. He mentioned how rare they were to see, and we discussed how their tusks curve inward so they can squeeze through narrow gaps between trees in dense forests. I've always been an animal nerd, so I was sharing what I knew with my wife, who loves animals but isn't quite as obsessive about the details. And then, as if summoned by our conversation, a forest elephant appeared, stepping carefully out from between the trees. We stopped instantly. The elephant hesitated the way they do, lifting one foot and pausing, sizing up the scene. Just then, some idiot came flying down the road in front of us, right between our vehicle and the elephant. My brain screamed, "Slow down, asshole!" The elephant didn't seem fazed, though. He calmly crossed the road in front of us and disappeared into the forest on the other side. Over the next few days, we saw leopards and hyenas, sightings that aren't guaranteed in Uganda, and I swear we spotted nearly every species of monkey the country has to offer. But that single moment when a forest elephant stepped out of the woods right after we'd been talking about them felt like pure magic. Story 30. I was staying in a dorm for a summer program when the fire alarm suddenly went off in the middle of the night. I threw on my shoes and went outside to the designated meeting spot shown on the evacuation map posted on my door. But no one else was there. The dorm was full, so that was immediately weird. I started wondering if I was dreaming, so I went back inside. Nope, the alarm was deafening, far too real for a dream. I checked the map again, confirmed the location, and went back out. Still no one. I began to wonder if I was hallucinating. Then the alarm stopped, but the lights kept flashing, confirming it was real. I ran into another student in the hall who looked just as confused. They said they'd gone to their meeting spot too, also completely empty. We compared our evacuation maps and realized they weren't the same. We decided to head back outside together, following both sets of instructions. Eventually, we found everyone else gathered on the opposite side of the building, at a meeting place that wasn't marked on either of our maps. Apparently, whoever printed the evacuation maps forgot to include all the designated spots. Most embarrassing part? My dad was a firefighter, and there I was, the kid who had been taught from birth never to re-enter a building during a fire alarm, going back inside twice because I was standing alone in the wrong place. Story 31. One rainy evening, my friend and I were driving when we spotted an elderly woman lying on the sidewalk. She had slipped and fallen, drenched from head to toe. We stopped immediately, helped her up, and made sure she wasn't injured. She was shaken but okay, so I offered to give her a ride home. She accepted and began giving me directions as we drove through the rain. A few minutes later, she suddenly said, "Wait, you just passed it." I asked where, and she pointed behind us toward the local cemetery. I laughed nervously, but she insisted. My friend in the back seat gave me the "this can't be real" look as I backed up and turned into the cemetery gates. My heart was pounding. It felt straight out of a horror movie. But it turned out there was nothing supernatural about it. The woman's son was the cemetery caretaker, and they lived in a small house deep inside the property. When we dropped her off, her family was overjoyed. They had been worried sick since the storm started. She forgot a bunch of flowers on the seat, and as I called out to return them, my friend couldn't resist whispering in her most ghostly voice, "Leave them on my grave." I nearly cried laughing on the drive home. Story 32. When I was younger, I went to a concert in Auckland and, like any responsible idiot, bought some party pills from the corner store. They were legal back then. Little capsules filled with BZP, advertised as giving you a mix of euphoria somewhere between ecstasy and a Red Bull overdose. My friends and I each took half a pack, felt nothing for a while, then naturally assumed more was the answer. About 10 minutes later, boom, we were high as satellites, dancing like maniacs and having the time of our lives. Around 5 in the morning, the come down hit hard, dragging insomnia with it. Since I couldn't sleep, I went for a walk. A few hours later, I was sitting on a park bench, still buzzing, when I started seeing rainbow birds and Disney-style castles. Then I noticed an elephant in the bushes, just standing there calmly, trunk swinging like it had errands to run. I thought, okay, I've officially lost it. Then it walked deeper into the trees and vanished. Back at the hotel, I told my mates, and they laughed so hard, saying the pills had clearly fried my brain. But later that day, the news broke. An elephant had escaped the zoo overnight and was hiding in the exact park where I'd been sitting. Turns out I wasn't hallucinating at all. I just accidentally tripped my way into spotting the fugitive before animal control did. Story 33. About 35 years ago, I was working in shipping and receiving for a golf and bowling supply company in Northeast Indiana. It was a gorgeous day. Sunny, 75 degrees. So we had the big garage door open. No loading dock, just a massive door leading right outside. I was minding my business when something in the corner of my eye moved. I looked over and saw, of all things, a monkey, maybe 2 feet tall, 10 pounds at most, casually walking across the floor toward a shelf full of bowling balls. It looked right at me, and the only thing that came out of my mouth was, "Monkey!" I was too stunned to think of anything else. I ran up front to the owner's office and told him there was a monkey climbing the shelves that held the 15 and 16-pound bowling balls. He told me to stop screwing around and get back to work. I told him he could keep my paycheck if I was lying, because even the guys printing t-shirts had seen it. He finally came to the back, saw it himself, and asked where it came from. I said it just walked in through the open door, didn't stop to chat, and reminded him that the Fort Wayne Zoo was less than a mile away. He called the zoo, and that's when they realized they were missing a monkey. Animal control showed up, safely caught it, and took it back. To this day, when I tell the story, no one believes me, but I'll never forget yelling "monkey" at work like a lunatic. Story 34. My engagement ring has a spiky raised stone, and I used to fidget with it constantly without realizing it. One day, while working in a busy cafe, I touched my ring and felt an empty socket. Complete panic. The building was old, with crooked floors and gaps between the boards. The perfect place for something tiny to vanish forever. I ran around searching everywhere. Then I remembered I'd gone to the restroom earlier. I rushed there, but the stall was occupied, so I waited outside, crouching to scan the floor. Nothing. I got up, told my coworkers, and we all started searching. After about half an hour, I remembered hearing a small plink sound while pulling my pants up earlier. Something hitting the porcelain. My heart dropped. I ran back to the toilet, moved everything off the floor, and looked down into the bowl. There it was, something glimmering faintly at the bottom. Without thinking twice, I plunged my hand straight in. And yes, it was my diamond. Somehow, despite 5 or 10 customers using the toilet in that time, it hadn't been flushed away. I got incredibly lucky. No one had gone number 2, so the heavier diamond sat at the bottom while the lighter toilet paper had flushed past. I never thought I'd be grateful for old plumbing, but that day, it saved my engagement ring. Story 35. When I was 12, I woke up in the middle of the night needing to go to the bathroom. I reached out for the light switch on the wall and instead jabbed my fingers into something warm and solid, the chest of something. I looked up and saw what I can only describe as a gray alien, but it didn't look like the ones you see in movies. It had smaller eyes with large pupils, not all black like the usual depictions. A smaller head, a flat nose with 2 little holes, and thin lips. I froze in shock for maybe half a second before diving under my blanket, trembling and listening for any sound. Nothing. No footsteps, no breathing, not even the sound of movement. I stayed like that, heart racing, until I finally gathered the courage to look again, and it was gone. I'm a natural skeptic, and I've never been able to explain it. The only theory that makes any sense is that maybe my dad was playing some kind of cruel prank, but I never asked him, and he passed away 19 years ago. It still haunts me. When people talk about seeing strange things, I usually assume they fall into one of 3 categories. People making things up for attention, people high or mentally unwell, or people who genuinely witness something inexplicable in a small specific moment. If what I saw was real, I have no idea what to believe. I felt it, skin over bone, solid, warm, real. Then it vanished silently, leaving no trace. I've accepted that I'll probably never know what really happened, but that uncertainty still eats at me after all these years. Story 36. My husband and kids had already moved to our new duty station, but I was still waiting for medical clearance to join them. During that time, I was living out of my car, camping wherever I could. One day, while trying to make the most of my situation, I decided to go on a little solo adventure. I'd always wanted to see Arcosanti in Arizona, that futuristic experimental eco-city. But tours were by reservation only with at least 24 hours notice. Still, I sent an email request, figuring it was a long shot. As I started driving towards Sedona instead, my phone rang right as I reached the fork in the highway where you either turn towards Sedona or Arcosanti. They told me it was fine to come up that day. They'd fit me in for a private tour. So I turned the wheel and headed for Arcosanti after all. The visit was incredible. I explored the architecture, wandered the desert paths, and soaked in the quiet. Afterward, I decided to treat myself and drive out of my way to eat at a restaurant owned by one of my favorite musicians. When I arrived, the staff mentioned they were closing early to attend that same musician's final Arizona show with his band, which of course was completely sold out. Even the worst seats were gone. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I could drive near the venue later and listen from the car. On the way there, I stopped at a breathtaking overlook, a valley framed by red desert cliffs, to take a photo. The guy parked next to me struck up small talk. I casually used a lyric from one of that band's songs to describe the view, and his eyes lit up. He was a fan too. Then, as if the universe had arranged it all, he said he had 2 extra tickets because his friends had canceled at the last minute. He offered me one for a third of the original price. That night I stood in a crowd of strangers, watching my favorite band play their final Arizona show, something that seemed completely impossible just hours before. Every little choice that day had led me there, perfectly aligned. It still feels like one of those rare, magical moments when the universe quietly says, "See, you were meant to be here." Story 37. I had traveled about 200 kilometers by public transport to start a hiking trail, and when I got off the bus in this tiny town, I noticed a man ahead of me who looked exactly like my ex. Same build, same posture. I brushed it off, thinking, no way, that's not possible. A few minutes later, I saw him again about 50 meters ahead, and this time I noticed the woman walking with him. My stomach dropped. It was definitely him. His tall frame, about 1.90 meters, his distinct bald head, the way he moved, the shape of his face, the glasses, and her too with her exact hairstyle, hair color, and even her clothing style. It was uncanny. I wasn't angry, but I wasn't thrilled either, especially since it seemed like they'd planned to hike the same trail. As we caught up to them near a restaurant, I braced myself for the inevitable awkward eye contact. They turned around and I froze. It wasn't them. Not quite. Every detail was just slightly off, the tiniest differences in their faces, but so subtle that it took me a second to realize. They were almost perfect copies. I stood there stunned, my heart still pounding. To this day, I can't explain it. Doppelgangers? Coincidence? Glitch in the matrix? The only thing I know is that for a brief moment, it truly felt like I was living inside a simulation. Story 38. It was Halloween night a few years ago, and I was driving to a bar with some friends when we witnessed a horrifying car crash right in front of us. A speeding driver slammed into another car from behind, sending it flipping across the road until it landed upside down. I pulled over immediately and called for an ambulance, staying until the first responders arrived. We were shaken but decided to keep going to the bar, trying to calm down over a drink. After about 45 minutes of talking about how surreal it all was, how close we'd been to being in that crash, we decided to head to a friend's apartment instead because the mood was too heavy. Not even 5 minutes after leaving the bar, we approached a roundabout and saw another car coming at insane speed. The driver didn't even slow down. He launched straight over the roundabout and crashed into a nearby business. The place was closed, thankfully. Once again, we stopped and called for help. It felt unreal. 2 serious crashes within less than 75 minutes, both right in front of us. I was driving the third car in line both times. I even took screenshots of my 2 calls to emergency services that night, though I can't find them anymore. It's been almost 4 years, and it still feels like a dream. Like my mind refuses to believe we actually witnessed that much chaos in one night. Luckily, as far as I know, everyone involved survived.